The universe is a conscious structure, through and through. Itzhak Bentov opens with that blunt claim, and it forces a different starting point. If consciousness is woven into the fabric of things, the cosmos is no longer a cold warehouse of matter waiting for meaning. It begins to look like a living system, connected, responsive, and intelligent. In this video, we'll follow Bentov's model from the tiniest vibrations in the physical world to what he calls the absolute. The aim isn't to dress physics up as mysticism or mysticism up as physics. It's to explore a practical way of thinking about consciousness through resonance, frequency, and the range of responses any system can produce. Along the way, we'll translate his ideas into plain language, so they land not as theory, but as something you can sense and apply in daily life. By the end, the neat line we draw between matter and spirit should feel much less convincing. We'll look at why your own baseline frequency shapes the slice of reality you experience, and what it might mean to take responsibility for how you respond to your environment. The striking part is that Bentov presents this as something you can check in your own experience. Once the logic clicks, it's like finding your balance on a bicycle. You don't really go back to wobbling the same way. You are not just watching the universe. You are part of the feedback loop that helps it know itself. The map to the source is on the table. Let's begin. Imagine you're walking along a quiet street and your shoe nudges a loose stone. Most of us register it as nothing more than an object, solid, mute, and thoroughly non-living. Bentov asks us to pause and look again. He argues that the sharp line we draw between alive and dead is not a fact of nature so much as a habit of perception. It reflects the limits of our senses and the assumptions our biology encourages us to make. For Bentov, consciousness is not a prize handed out only to creatures with nervous systems, nor something that suddenly appears when a brain becomes complicated enough. He uses a stripped-down definition. Consciousness is a system's capacity to respond to what happens to it. Once you start there, the universe stops resembling a storehouse of lifeless matter. It becomes a continuum of participation, with different things capable of different kinds of response. Bentov's claim is not that everything is conscious in the human sense, but that everything expresses some degree of responsiveness. To see what he means, he points to something as small and ordinary as an atom. Give an atom energy and its electrons shift into an excited state. Remove the stimulus and they drop back, releasing energy as light. No feelings are required for this. It is simply a consistent reaction to a change in conditions. Yet, by Bentov's definition, that reaction already counts as a rudimentary form of consciousness, a detectable, patterned response. Move up a step to a virus and the picture becomes richer. A virus can recognize a suitable host cell, attach, and replicate. A bacterium can do more again. It can navigate chemical gradients, adjust metabolism, and defend itself. In Bentov's view, evolution is not best described as the appearance of consciousness out of nowhere, but as the steady expansion of the menu of possible responses. What grows over time is the number and variety of ways a system can answer the same impact. A human being illustrates the point. Faced with cold, we can shiver, put on a coat, make a fire, change our diet, redesign our homes, or move to a different climate. We can plan, remember, collaborate, and invent. The stone you kicked has only a narrow set of molecular responses available. It contracts or expands slightly. Its bonds vibrate. Its structure slowly weathers. The key difference for Bentov is not that we possess consciousness and the stone does not. It is that our range is vast, and the stones is minimal. From this angle, Bentov's opening line, "The universe is a conscious structure, through and through," is a statement about continuity. We are not awake islands floating in a dead sea. We are specialized parts of a single immense system, displaying different densities of intelligence because we can generate different degrees of response. Our capacity has become so elaborate that we mistake it for exclusivity, as though awareness begins and ends with us. Bentov offers a metaphor to keep us honest. Daily perception, he says, is like a radio fixed to one station. Because we hear that station clearly, we assume the rest of the dial is empty. But silence, in this case, is just a lack of tuning. His point is not that we should adopt a new belief, but that we should update our concepts and test what follows. When observation is freed from old categories, the structure of reality starts to show itself, not as an abstract argument, but as something you can notice and experience. Seen this way, reality is not simply a stage on which events happen to us. It is a field of interaction in which we participate, moment by moment, through how we respond. The universe is less a collection of objects and more a spectrum of relationships. And once you notice it, old categories start to loosen. To accept Bentov's starting point, that everything responds, is to face an immediate question. How do we organize such a sprawling range of beings without falling back on vague ideas of spirit and matter? Bentov's answer is disarmingly technical. Evolution, he says, can be read as a measurable climb in the sophistication of response. Not a random parade of accidents, but a map showing how consciousness expresses itself at different levels. On this view, the difference between a stone and a person is not a moral or metaphysical gap. It is the difference between a narrow response system and a rich one. Bentov pictures these levels as bands on a frequency scale. Each step up represents a jump in the amount of information a system can register, process, and answer back with. Higher frequency does not mean faster thoughts. It means a wider repertoire of possible reactions. At the base of the scale sits the atom. Its behavior is limited and dependable. Apply energy, shift state. Remove it, return and release energy. In everyday terms, it is single purpose, almost automatic. Yet even here, there is a basic yes-no responsiveness to the environment. When atoms join into molecules and then into complex organic structures, that simple pattern begins to multiply. New structures create new pathways, and new pathways create new options for response. Bentov marks a major jump when matter organizes into viruses and bacteria. Now the system is not merely undergoing chemistry. It is behaving in ways that serve persistence. A virus recognizes a host and replicates. A bacterium can move towards nutrients, avoid toxins, and regulate internal conditions. The key change is that responses start to look goal-directed. Life is no longer just reacting. It is participating in its own survival. Further up the scale, plants add another layer of complexity. A plant senses light, gravity, and moisture, but it also manages growth, repairs damage, and coordinates activity across its whole body. It sends chemical signals, sometimes even warning neighbors, and it adapts its structure to seasons and stress. Still, most of its responses are locked into programs, slow, cyclical, and largely automatic. Compared with a rock, it is richly responsive. Compared with an animal, it remains tethered to fixed routines. The pace shifts again with the nervous system. Bentov often points to animals like dogs because they show the jump plainly. An animal does not only react to the present moment, it remembers, learns, anticipates, and forms bonds. The same stimulus can be met with fear, play, caution, aggression, or curiosity depending on context and history. In Bentov's language, the nervous system functions like an antenna. It gathers more signals, sorts them more quickly, and enables far more nuanced behavior than a plant could manage. Humans occupy a higher band still. What matters here is not our shape, but the complexity of our central processing, the brain and the symbolic mind it supports. We can imagine alternatives, rehearse futures, and choose responses that run against immediate instinct. We can fast, forgive, delay gratification, and act on principles that don't offer a simple biological payoff. That ability to generate options makes the human response range, in principle, open-ended. And yet Bentov's most provocative point is that this may be only the beginning of the human range. He treats early human functioning as transitional, not final. Most people, he suggests, live in a narrow slice of what the nervous system could do, tuned to familiar signals and blind to subtler ones. Evolution, in his framework, is the steady refinement of the antenna, increasing the quantity of consciousness by expanding what we can perceive and how many ways we can answer it. Each band on the scale corresponds to a reality of its own. A stone inhabits a world of slow, limited responses. A plant lives in a world of growth and regulation. An animal lives in a world of emotion, learning, and immediate meaning. We live in a world shaped by language, abstraction, and choice. The unsettling implication is that there may be bands above ours, forms of organization, whose responsiveness makes our own look as simple as the stones. Bentov's ladder, then, has no neat ceiling. It points upward towards ever more integrated, sensitive, intelligent systems. In that long ascent, matter is not the opposite of consciousness. It is consciousness at an early stage of learning how to respond. As our range widens, our sense of self shifts from isolated individual to participant in a larger mind. And the destination, as Bentov frames it, is not domination of the world, but deeper alignment with the organizing intelligence behind it, what he calls the absolute. Once you accept Bentov's idea that consciousness can be measured by the number of possible responses a system can produce, another question quickly follows. Why do two people with broadly similar biology seem to inhabit entirely different worlds? Why does one person notice patterns, meanings, and subtleties that another simply never registers? Bentov's answer hinges on a second dimension: quality. Quantity is the size of the menu, how many options are available. Quality is how fine the instrument is, how accurately it detects, sorts, and responds to what is there. A simple comparison helps. Think of an excellent sound system. Quantity is how loud it can go without falling apart. Quality is whether it reproduces a full range from deep bass to delicate high notes, without smearing everything into noise. It is the difference between a muffled broadcast and music that feels three-dimensional. For Bentov, that quality shows up as frequency response. Every organism and every nervous system is naturally tuned to a certain band. What we casually call the physical world is not the whole of reality. It is the slice our senses handle most efficiently. It's like living inside a vast symphony while hearing only a narrow octave. The missing notes are not absent. We are simply not tuned to them, and our current quality of response cannot pick them out from the wider field. This is where Bentov introduces a more technical idea, what he calls energy exchange curves. The basic claim is straightforward. We interact most strongly with whatever vibrates in the same range as we do. Where the match is best, The curve peaks, and exchange becomes efficient. Attention locks on, perception stabilizes, and the world feels solid. For the average person, Bentov places that peak squarely in the realm of dense matter and the familiar flow of linear time. That is the band in which our nervous system is most confident and therefore most convinced. But in his model, the curve is not fixed. As the quality of consciousness improves, the curve broadens. In practical terms, the antenna becomes more sensitive and less noisy. A person begins to register finer signals, subtler cues in the environment, more information in other people, and a richer sense of inner states. Over time, this widening makes it possible to engage with bands of reality that sit beyond the strictly physical. Nothing has to travel anywhere. The change is in reception. What once arrived as background static starts to resolve into recognizable detail. Bentov pushes the idea further, and this is where it becomes genuinely unsettling. Reality is always relative to the observer's quality of perception. If a being were organized at a much higher frequency range than ours, the world we treat as heavy and solid might appear thin, fluid, even transparent, more like a mist than a wall. And what we call empty space might not look empty at all. It could read to a more refined system, as structured, active, densely patterned, filled with relationships we cannot yet detect. That doesn't mean anything goes, as though reality is just personal opinion. Bentov's point is more precise. What is available to you as experienced reality is filtered by the quality of your response system. The filter decides what becomes obvious, what remains faint, and what stays completely invisible. In that sense, evolution is not simply an accumulation of facts, thoughts, or mental chatter. It is a shift in resolution. As perception sharpens, the world you can genuinely interact with becomes larger. Bentov's diagrams place higher states above our current band, not as distant locations, but as higher vibrations, overlapping layers that can occupy the same space while remaining unseen. The universe, in his picture, is stacked like that, interpenetrating levels, each accessible through a matching quality of response. Our limits, then, are less about the universe refusing us entry and more about our own tuning. As resonance refines, the edges of the ordinary world start to thin. And through those thinning edges, Bentov suggests, we begin to glimpse what he calls the absolute, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a wider, steadier contact with what has been there all along. After mapping reality into bands of frequency, Bentov says the next question is unavoidable. What is it that does the perceiving? In his model, perception is not simply what the brain does with sensory input. There is an inner standpoint he calls the observer, the part of us that notices, feels, and assigns meaning. He often names it the psyche, or the soul, not as a religious ornament, but as a functional component in the system. Bentov treats the body as a dense instrument, tuned to slow, sturdy signals. Pressure, light, heat, sound, chemistry. Spirit, by contrast, refers to levels of vibration that are far subtler and far quicker. The body on its own cannot comfortably interface with that range. Trying to force it would be like wiring a household lamp straight into a power station. The current is simply too much for the circuitry. Something has to sit in between. That something is the psyche acting as a transformer. It receives higher frequency information and steps it down into forms the nervous system can register. Images, sensations, emotions, hunches, sudden recognitions. It also works in the other direction, carrying our attention, intention, and learning upward, so that experience is not trapped inside the skull, but can resonate with wider layers of reality. The observer, in other words, is the bridge that makes exchange possible. This is why, in Bentov's view, the most meaningful moments in life often arrive without a neat chain of reasoning. You can be walking, washing up, or half asleep, and an answer lands fully formed. He describes these as packets of information, complete blocks that arrive too quickly for linear thought to assemble. Only afterwards does the intellect get involved, pulling the packet apart, translating it into words, and trying to justify it with causes and steps. Reason is not dismissed. It is simply slower, and it tends to work after the fact. When Bentov says trust the observer, he does not mean abandon judgment. He means recognize the difference between reception and interpretation. The psyche can register patterns before the conscious mind can explain them. If you ignore that early signal every time, you narrow your response curve and end up living only in what can be proved on the spot. If you learn to listen, carefully, critically, but sincerely, you widen the channel through which reality can reach you. In practical terms, Bentov frames human development as the gradual cleaning and strengthening of this bridge. Stress, fear, and habitual noise distort the signal. A scattered attention makes the transformer inefficient. A calmer, more coherent inner life makes it clearer. As the psyche refines, communication between body and spirit becomes smoother. Intuition becomes more reliable, empathy more precise, and perception less boxed in by old assumptions. Bentov's image is of a captain within the biological vessel, a presence that belongs to two domains at once and whose task is to bring them into alignment. Seen that way, the spiritual is not somewhere out there. It is part of our operating system, already involved in how we sense, decide, and respond. We are built to mediate between the finite and the infinite. For Bentov, that is not an exceptional achievement. It is our default design, waiting to be used well. That also means the observer can be trained. The more you practice steady attention, through reflection, quiet, or simply noticing your own reactions, the less you mistake habit for truth. In Bentov's terms, you stop confusing the instrument with the musician. The body reports, the mind comments, but the observer learns to hear the signal behind both and act with more clarity. With the psyche in place as the bridge between biology and subtler domains, Bentov introduces the next character in his model, the higher self. He is not talking about a better mood or an idealized version of your personality. He means a level of identity that operates at a far higher frequency than the physical body can sustain. In this framework, your day-to-day you is a local interface, while the higher self is the wider pattern behind it, steady, continuous, and not bound to the usual limits of linear time or Newtonian matter. Because the gap in vibration is so large, that higher identity cannot simply drop in and run the body directly. Its information has to be stepped down through the psyche, the same way a transformer makes high voltage usable. The psyche filters, translates, and delivers the signal in forms the brain can work with. A clear inner nudge, a sudden sense of certainty, a meaningful coincidence that lands with unusual weight. Bentov's point is not that the higher self shouts instructions. It communicates quietly, and the mind recognizes it less as a sentence and more as a knowing. Most people have tasted this in flashes. You wrestle with a problem for days, then the answer arrives while you are doing something ordinary. You cannot always explain how you got there, but you can feel the fit of it. Bentov treats those moments as brief alignments. For a second, the channel clears, and the higher signal gets through with minimal distortion. Reason can then do its job, checking, testing, and integrating. But it often comes after the initial contact, not before. In Bentov's wider picture, human development is largely the work of making that contact more stable. As the quality of consciousness improves, the exchange between personality and higher self becomes smoother, more frequent, and less dramatic. The goal is not to escape the world, but to bring higher level coherence into it. A mature person, in this sense, is someone whose choices in daily life carry the imprint of a broader intelligence, less reactive, more accurate, more compassionate, and more responsible. Bentov then removes the last comfort of isolation. He suggests that higher selves are not separate units floating in a private spiritual space. At a higher frequencies, separation is a byproduct of limited tuning, not a final truth. He imagines an immense network, like a shimmering web, in which each higher self is a node in constant, instantaneous exchange with every other node. Communication is not slowed by distance because, at that level, distance is no longer the organizing principle. If that is so, then nothing you live through is wasted. Every experience on the physical plane, however small it seems, is gathered, processed, and added to the whole. Bentov describes something like a universal bank of experience, a shared reservoir where insights, lessons, and even pain are converted into usable information. Your personal story does not disappear. It is metabolized into the collective intelligence of the system. This shifts the emotional meaning of life. Struggle is not proof of abandonment. It is data in motion. Joy is not merely private pleasure. It is a signal of alignment. And relationship is not accidental. It is resonance between parts of the same web. In Bentov's model, cooperation is not a moral slogan, but a structural fact. At the highest level, everything is already connected, and everything already informs everything else. From the inside, this feels less like hearing voices and more like becoming quieter. The signal is easiest to miss when the personality is crowded with urgency, resentment, or fear. Bentov would say the filter becomes noisy. Practices that settle the body, breath, stillness, honest self-observation, reduce that noise, so guidance arrives as a clean direction rather than a confusing swirl in the moment. Tuning to the higher self, then, is not about becoming special. It is about becoming connected. As the channel clears, the sense of being a lost stranger in the universe begins to fade, replaced by a quieter confidence that you are part of something that learns through you. Bentov frames this as a shared trajectory toward the absolute. Increasing coherence, increasing clarity, and an ever wider capacity to respond with intelligence and care. After tracing evolution and the network of higher selves, Bentov points to what he sees as the source of it all, the absolute. To make sense of the term, he asks us to drop for a moment the picture of a universe made of separate, solid things. Instead, imagine reality as an endless field of energy, capable of taking on countless patterns. The absolute is that field in its purest state, unlimited potential, coherent intelligence, and, most surprisingly, complete rest. Bentov says the absolute, in its unmanifest form, cannot be detected by ordinary senses, not because it is elsewhere, but because there is nothing in it to bump into, no contrast for our instruments to measure. To help the mind grasp this, he uses the image of an ocean. Picture a sea so deep and calm that, in its depths, there are no currents at all, no waves, no turbulence, no movement, just water at perfect equilibrium. That stillness is his stand-in for the absolute. Now disturb the surface. A breeze passes, a stone drops, a swell begins. The water has not become something new, yet forms appear, ripples, crests, patterns that can be named and tracked. For Bentov, the manifest universe works the same way. Stars, planets, bodies, and atoms are not separate from the absolute. They are modulations of it, energy set into vibration at particular rates. Matter is simply the ocean moving in ways our biology can register. This is where Bentov makes a counterintuitive move. At the level of the absolute, he says, opposites collapse into one another. Rest and motion are not rivals. If something could move at an infinite speed, it would appear frozen to any observer because there would be no change left to detect. In that sense, absolute motion looks like absolute stillness. So the absolute is not a dead void. It is energy so fast, so ordered, and so complete that it presents as perfect calm. From this perspective, the universe is a vibratory structure that oscillates between states of rest. Every part of creation, from the atom's nucleus to the most distant galaxy, expresses itself as a frequency. Sound here is a metaphor for pattern, a signature of how energy is moving. Once you adopt that view, the usual divide between mind and matter begins to soften. Both are made of the same stuff. What we call matter is that energy vibrating slowly and densely. What we call mind is the same energy vibrating more finely and rapidly, carrying more information per moment. Bentov's aim is not to replace science with poetry, but to widen the frame. If we are waves in the same ocean, then separation is a useful appearance, not the final truth. We are not cut off from the source. We are the source, experiencing itself as motion, form, and time. The absolute is the silence behind the music, the still background that allows every note to be heard, and the point to which every pattern ultimately returns. That return does not mean annihilation. Bentov uses the ocean image to suggest continuity. A wave rises, travels, and subsides, yet nothing has left the sea. In the same way, individual lives are temporary patterns in a larger medium. When the pattern loosens, its information is not lost. It is reabsorbed into the wider field that holds every possibility. This is also why, in his model, inner development matters. As the psyche becomes a clearer receiver, it can sense the stillness beneath the surface activity and respond from there, rather than being pushed around by every passing ripple. The absolute is therefore not a distant God figure, but the quiet ground of experience, present at the center of every moment, even when the surface is loud. And if everything is made from the same energy, then the journey upward is not escape from matter, but a refinement of how that energy is shaped and known here. It may be that after traveling through atoms, frequencies, and the absolute, a part of your mind still wants something solid, something you can point to and call proof. Bentov knew this resistance well, and to soften it, he offers a simple parable. The bicycle. Try explaining balance to someone who has never seen one. You can hand them textbooks, talk about inertia and gyroscopes, sketch diagrams until you are hoarse, yet none of it gives them the lived fact of staying upright. Knowledge becomes real the moment they climb on, wobble, fall, try again, and feel the quiet click where the body finds its center. Bentov says the same applies to consciousness. The ideas are not meant as a creed to swallow, but as a working model you can test in your own experience. Once you start paying attention to how you respond, you begin to notice patterns. What narrows you? What opens you? What makes the signal clearer? In his language, intuition is not guesswork. It is information arriving as a complete packet, delivered through the psyche from a wider level of you. Reason still matters, but it often plays catch-up, translating after the fact what was already known in a flash. The point is not to stop thinking. It is to recognize that the biggest shifts in human history rarely begin as step-by-step arguments. They begin as glimpses that later become maps. Bentov's work keeps returning to one quiet conclusion. You are not a stray observer in a cold universe. You are a crest on a single ocean, a wave through which intelligence learns itself. Every time you refine your response, you contribute to that larger field of experience. We are not here to watch life from the pavement. We are here to remember what we are made of. Like the cyclist who stops staring at the pedals and starts enjoying the road, you are invited to ease your grip on the need to control and to move with the rhythm beneath events. Mastery, in this sense, is not winning an argument about the universe. It is becoming a clear channel through which life can be met with intelligence, steadiness, and care. That is why the question at the end is not, what is consciousness? The question is, what will you do with your attention now? You can keep living inside the narrow band of habit, or you can practice tuning. Notice what raises your baseline and what drags it down. Choose responses that widen you rather than tighten you. Little by little, the background quietens, and the deeper signal becomes easier to hear. The moment you begin that practice, the journey is already underway. Not someday, not elsewhere, but here, in the next breath. And that is how you wake up to yourself. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.